There is still to this day this tomb that's been thought of as Robin Hood's grave.
Okay.
There's this big stone slab and another stone with an epitaph on it. One of the best ways to study him is through archaeology. And we can take real places, real events, and use archaeology to learn a lot more of them. If Robin Hood really existed, if Robin Hood was this great archer, we would be able to look at his bones and tell that he's an archer. He engages in poaching, he engages in thievery, occasionally in murder even. So he's engaging in outlaw activities. There's implications that Robin might have something going on with the sheriff's wife, or at least he's a little flirtatious with her. There's a lot of debate that I see between historians today about how terrible John may or may not have been. I fall on the side of he was a bad dude. He sucked. Straight up sucked. They have a Robin Hood's cave. And it's like, ooh, here's this legend of where Robin Hood would hide from the Sheriff of Nottingham in this cave. And, you know, it's a fascinating site where there's a lot of really amazing archaeology that's happening. So this was a tourist trap.
Yeah, exactly.
17th century, 18th century tourist trap. Come see Little John's hat, see his long bow, see like his grave. We know his grave was there because we found this giant leg bone in it.
Are you saying that Robin Hood was the Neanderthal that took down Atlantis?
Yeah, it's a legend.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're using archaeology to be like, yeah, it's just a legend, guys. Calm down. The search for truth
it just looks like a mossy stone with a line on it.
The search for truth sometimes indicates that a legend is a legend.
All right, welcome back to Archaeology with Flint Dibble, and I am here with a good friend of the channel, Thaddeus Papke.
Hello.
And he is one of the world's amateur experts on Robin Hood.
Yes, amateur is appropriate. I don't have a degree in the subject, but I do have a long-running podcast where I've been studying Robin Hood and discussing with people who are experts, not just in Robin Hood, but in a wide variety of fields. And I've been running this podcast for a few years. We're at 55 episodes at this point.
Into the Greenwood. Make sure you check it out. And so we're here to talk about the archaeology of Robin Hood.
Yes.
And I don't know what look, Thaddeus here is a professional science communicator, by the way.
Yes, this is true. I don't consider myself a scientist. I'm not an archaeologist. I do know a lot of archaeologists. And I've spent a lot of time around scientists. I've worked in research labs myself. And then in my day job, I work in science centers and planetariums to communicate about science in a wide variety of different fields and topics. Paleontology and astronomy are favorites of mine. But I also got my undergraduate degree in cultural anthropology with a specialization in folklore and history, which is part of what led me to Robin Hood and really wanting to delve more into those legends and our understanding of that character and how it has changed over the centuries.
Interesting. So for me, I'm most familiar with Robin Hood from the movie.
A time when the only way to uphold justice was to break the law.
You know, I'm a big fan of Robin Hood Men in Tights. Mel Brooks is just, comedic genius. What is your favorite adaptation of Robin Hood in today's world?
So my favorite would have to be the 1938 film, The Adventures of Robin Hood, with Errol Flynn, Basil Rathbone, Olivia de Havilland.
And what do you propose to do?
I'll organize a revolt, exact a death for a death, and I'll never rest until every Saxon in this shire can stand up, free men, and strike a blow for Richard and England.
I was given a copy of that when I was a child. It was one of my favorite movies that I watched again and again. There's some of the lessons from that movie in terms of the character that Robin brings forward, in terms of his willingness to just stand up for good for the sake of being good, sacrificing his own position to fight tyranny because it's the right thing to do. This is a Robin Hood who very much could go along with the status quo, could live a comfortable life as a nobleman, but chooses not to. Chooses to forego comforts because he sees people doing things that are bad and wrong and harming other people, and he won't stand for it.
It sounds like we need somebody like that today.
Yeah, there are parallels. And this is
Yeah.
part of what makes Robin Hood work down through the centuries, why he's always been popular. And you said, you're mostly familiar with him through the movies. Well, in the medieval period, people would be mostly familiar with him through plays, through games, through troubadours who are singing songs, and really that's just their equivalent of movies. He's always been a pop culture figure.
That makes sense. Always fighting the rich and sticking up for the poor, I suppose.
In some way, there's some scholarly debate about that particular subject, but a figure that is intended to have appeal to the public in general starts out as very much a figure that common people can latch onto. Once he gets a certain amount of kind of notoriety and existence in literature, especially into the Tudor period, he gets gentrified and becomes more associated with the noble class, gets portrayed in theater, becomes more accessible to the aristocracy. In later centuries, becomes a figure in operas as well. But, people who are upper class are always going to take the culture of people who are lower class. And
they're populists too, as we can see today. So, okay, break it down for me. Was Robin Hood a real person?
Right, so that is always the big question. First thing that comes up. And again, this is an area where there is tons of speculation, tons of debate. And I wrote down in my notebook earlier this morning a bunch of names. And it includes a Robert Hood, who...
That sounds like Robin Hood.
It does, yes. Robin is often
really
taken as a pseudonym or a nickname for Robin. Robert, yep.
Okay.
And he was a servant of an abbot in... Cirencester? Yeah, I'm not sure if it's Cirencester or Cirencester.
I'm not sure. Neither of us are British, even though we're here in Wales.
Yeah.
This is a real problem for us.
But he slew someone named Ralph in around 1213, 1216.
Okay.
So he's on this legal record, so we have a criminal.
Okay.
1213.
So there's a criminal in 1213 AD.
But we also have a Robin Hood.
Okay.
From 1244, who had this location known as Hodd's Place. He's in the legal rolls, not having been in trouble with the law, but we know of him. But there's also 1225, the Sheriff of Yorkshire orders the capture of a Robert of Wetherby. And in the pipe rolls, there's mention of the forfeited chattel of one Robartus Hodd, which may be a reference to this person.
Robert Hood.
And then we have a mention of a William Rob Hood in Berkshire from 1261, who's a member of a gang. We have an outlaw for murder in 1272 named John Robin Hood. 1272, Alexander Rob Hood, accused of theft in Essex. We have 1286, Gilbert Rob Hood, charged for something, we don't even know what, in Suffolk. We have in 1294, Robert Rob Hood, stealing sheep in Hampshire. So the kind of notion that really exists is that by the late 13th century, Rob Hood or Robin Hood or some variation thereof was used as sort of a placeholder name for a criminal. This
so it's
is
like calling someone John Doe, but if they're a criminal, you call them Robin Hood.
Well, we still have like the people's first names, but this is a period before surnames are really
I
common.
see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, so people like all of this Alexander Rob Hood, like that wasn't a last name yet,
like
really.
Smith would mean that you're a Smith.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so there's this notion that Rob Hood is a nickname for a thief. By the 14th century, we start to see references to individuals that are just named Robin Hood, or will be like Elizabeth Robin Hood, where Robin Hood seems to be a patronymic.
Okay.
So it is kind of in this stage of morphing into a potential nickname for criminals into just a name that exists and can get passed along.
So are there a lot of other people with completely different first names that have Hood as a last name that are criminals?
Absolutely.
So it is a very common thing in the legal system to just call them a Hood.
And then once we get into the later period, just the name Robin Hood is a relatively common name, especially around the Midlands and the north, around Yorkshire. And there are certain individuals, like a Robert of Wakefield, who may have also been known as Robin Hood, who worked at the King's Palace and was in the retinue of Edward II for a little while. People try to draw a link to that with the Jest of Robin Hood, where King Edward takes Robin Hood into his service for a period. Roger Godberd, who was a real outlaw who fought in the Second Barons' War and then was an outlaw after Simon de Montfort lost the war, and then he was kind of on his own with a group of men. He sometimes gets associated with Robin Hood too, but that's all super speculative.
Okay.
Like actually trying to draw the connections, you start to look like the guy with the conspiracy board, and you're just like
Charlie and It's Always Sunny. With
you're picking at threads. You're saying, "Ooh, well, we can draw a parallel to this one, and if this guy, like, ooh, Roger Godberd and his followers, they were known for attacking a monastery, and in the early Robin Hood ballads, he fights some monks." I'm saying, well, yeah, a lot of people got into trouble with the church or attacked monks, or, you know, or they were just kind of unpopular. Like, maybe some of this was inspiring what was written down later. But the other thing to keep in mind is that while there's these earlier individuals who might have inspired something, and all of these earlier criminal cases we can find, the actual written stories of Robin Hood that we have, those are written down starting in the mid-15th century.
So 300 years later.
Yeah, 200 years later.
Yeah.
So whatever inspiration there might have been has morphed so much that it's functionally unrecognizable. So
Yeah.
if
It's a
there,
myth.
yeah, if there is any kind of historical Robin Hood or figure that inspired the legends, it's so far removed from even the medieval stories that we have. Forget the modern films. It's just so far removed from even the medieval stories that it functionally just doesn't matter.
So basically, all right, I'm a scholar of ancient Greece, and you think of myths as adopting and adapting via oral storytelling. So
Right.
via songs and stuff like that.
Very
Is that
similar to
what
Robin
we
Hood.
see in medieval England and with these stories? in
100,
Scotland?
100%.
Okay.
So, like I said, we have these legal records where there's people that have names that maybe mean something that might relate to Robin Hood. The first time that we can definitively say, here is clear evidence that people are enjoying stories of Robin Hood, comes from around 1377 with William Langland's Piers Plowman. And in it, there's a single line where the priest Sloth, who's exemplifies improper behaviors, you know, he's the bad, lazy priest, has a line about how he cannot perfectly his paternoster like the priest singeth, but he can rhymes of Robin Hood and Ranulph Earl of Chester.
So suggesting this is lowbrow.
Right. Exactly, that
songs.
it's lowbrow, that this is what the common people know, but it is a pop culture reference.
Okay.
Our first, we know Robin Hood is being discussed and that there are stories of Robin Hood exists in the form of a pop culture reference.
Okay. Yeah. So it's saying, hey, this guy's lazy and slothful. He
Yep.
enjoys Robin Hood.
Yep, the rhymes of Robin Hood, and these are the stories that people are telling or people are singing or performing in alehouses sometimes. And it is popular entertainment. We know it exists, but it's being passed on through oral tradition in some form or other.
Okay, that makes sense. So, what are these earliest stories about? Are they similar to the movies we have, or do they focus on something completely different?
So there's actually a decent amount of variety
Okay.
that we get. The earliest recorded story that we have comes from around 1450. It's Robin Hood and the Monk. And it's a story that also implies the existence of earlier stories because it's about Robin Hood going to St. Mary's in Nottinghamshire, and that's actually one of the photos I included for you was
Okay.
St. Mary's in
Should we pull that up
Nottingham,
now,
because you can
or-
still go to it. Yeah, if you want to take a look.
Yeah.
So interestingly, one common thread that you get in a lot of these early songs and ballads and poems is that Robin Hood is very devout to the Virgin Mary. That's a big difference with the modern adaptations, especially like since the Protestant Reformation. The cult of Mary hasn't been as popular with English tradition as it was in the medieval ages.
Okay.
But
It's interesting. It's still very popular in Greece.
yes, well,
Different areas, different saints.
the Reformation was a much different experience in Greece than it was
Yeah, of course,
in,
well, it's Orthodox
in
there, yeah,
Western
yeah.
Europe. Yeah, but there still are a lot of churches named St. Mary. She's still a revered figure, but getting away from the worship of saints was, a big part of the Reformation in general. The Anglicans really kind of split the difference in some ways compared to Catholics and other Protestants that really try to get further and further,
further away
from them.
that kind of, yeah.
But in Robin Hood and the Monk, Robin Hood wants to go to St. Mary's. He wants to just go to Mass because it's been a long time. He's being religiously devout.
Okay.
And when he's there, a monk who has seen him before, who he previously robbed. So again, that implication that there are earlier stories, that this is part of a tradition, basically recognizes him, turns him in. Robin has a big fight action scene with the sheriff's men, but gets captured. Little John and Much the Miller's son waylay the monk and his page when they're on the way to tell the king that this notorious outlaw has been captured. They kill the monk and his page, take their clothes, and go and pretend to be them to talk to the king, and kind of use this as a ruse to get a writ from the king that lets them go back to Nottingham and get access to Robin and free him from out of underneath the sheriff's nose. Interestingly, earlier in that poem, Robin Hood and Little John get into an argument.
Okay.
And Robin Hood comes out looking like a jerk. He and Little John have a shoot and archery contest, and Little John wins it.
Huh.
And then
that's
Robin
all I can
refuses to pay up afterwards. But then the payoff is at the end of the story. So where Little John, who's been the real hero of the story, winning the earlier contest, rescuing Robin Hood. After the rescue, Robin Hood says, "You should be in charge. Like, I dropped the ball, you followed through, you should be in charge." And Little John says, "No, that's not how it works.
Just pay me."
Well, the idea is just because I did you a solid, just because I'm doing my job doesn't mean you don't get to do yours.
Yeah,
you don't get to
exactly.
continue
Yeah.
to pass
You
the
still
buck.
have to
Now,
lead
like,
us.
you get to be the leader.
So I guess part of the if there's no real Robin Hood, it is set in a mythical but also historical landscape in real places, right?
Yes, real places, Nottinghamshire, Barnesdale, Sherwood gets mentioned as well, and Barnesdale is in kind of southern Yorkshire.
Okay.
And so there's a debate that goes on to this day about whether Robin Hood is from Nottinghamshire or from Yorkshire. Both places will try to claim him. But the Sheriff of Nottingham is there right away.
Okay.
He is a villain that exists in these early tales. And one of the next early tales you get is Robin Hood and the Potter, which is a much more kind of silly, lighthearted, we're going to have a bunch of japes and trick the sheriff, and there's not a lot of murders. And in that one, there's also a contest between Robin Hood and Little John, but this time Robin Hood pays up right away.
Okay.
So even right in our earliest sources, we're getting very different tones. We're getting very different types of action. You get a very bleak, action-y, dark tale with Robin Hood and the Monk, but with Robin Hood and the Potter, he dresses in the guise of the Potter, he sells cheap pots in town, he tricks the sheriff into riding into Sherwood with him, but they don't kill the sheriff when he's there, they just embarrass him. There's implications that Robin might have something going on with the sheriff's wife, or at least he's a little flirtatious with her, and that's one of the ones that has some element of Robin Hood robbing from the rich and giving to the poor. He robs from the sheriff, he pays this Potter, who he initially has a fight with on the road, but eventually pays him very well. He sells the pots very cheap to the widows and women in Nottingham. So that one has that element that we might think of in terms of Robin Hood is fun, lighthearted, and stealing from the rich and giving to the poor, whereas some of our other early tales, that element's not as much there.
So, okay, so it sounds to me like there's a cycle of stories, each one told with different morals, each one told with slightly different characters or settings.
Different
and it's
authors
about
adapting for different audiences.
Tricking the authorities, in a sense, it's a series of escapades that Robin Hood has against mostly the Sheriff of Nottingham and some monks and stuff like
yes,
that.
monks. The Bishop of Hereford shows up later. The abbot, the Prior of St. Mary's in the Jest of Robin Hood. Figures who represent authority, who represent kind of a sense of responsibility for people and who are not living up to that sense of responsibility. They are not doing right by other people. They're not being charitable. You know, the abbots and bishops are going around living large off the land while people are hungry and starving. And there's a lot of speculation that what kind of birthed the popularity of these stories was the intense famines that were happening in England in the 1320s, which would also coincide with the notion of Edward as the king that appears in these stories.
So Edward's the king, not Prince John and Richard the Lionheart.
Yeah, but which Edward, we don't even know. It just says the comely King Edward, and I have heard scholars make cases for Edward I, Edward II, and Edward III. The concept of Robin Hood being linked to King Richard I and Prince John doesn't come into play until an antiquarian named John Major, a Scottish antiquarian, in around 1521, creates a timeline for when he thinks Robin Hood existed. And he's following in a tradition that other antiquarians, so would-be historians, are creating these chronologies that are sort of very Herodotus style, you know, semi-fictional histories. Some of like there's a lot of verifiable historical things here, but a lot that is played up and made up and inserted because it sounds fun. And a lot of that includes putting Robin Hood into the real history, and that's where you get Robin Hood in the Second Barons' War in the 1300s. And again, these are chroniclers who are writing in the 15th century and the 16th century. So again, these are centuries later.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's much after the fact. And John Major puts Robin Hood in the time of Richard I. And then Anthony Munday, who was a playwright in the Elizabethan period, writes a couple of plays, including The Downfall of Robert, Earl of Huntington, that also kind of helps cement that in the popular consciousness. And then even later down the lines, Ivanhoe by Sir Walter Scott in the 1820s, which was a huge bestseller and also has Robin Hood and King Richard as characters in the book.
So
even further drives that nail into the coffin.
So wait a second. So when do we first get kind of a start to finish story? So it sounds like a lot of these early ones are cycles. They're little episodes within the larger story of who Robin Hood is. But when you go watch a movie, you know, Prince of Thieves or whatever, you have this kind of start to end, and at the end there's a resolution. Is there when do you have that kind of narrative of Robin Hood going from his origin, becoming a thief, let's say, to actually resolving the situation? Is that really just a completely modern thing, or is that...
Well, completely modern and at least post-medieval.
Okay.
In the medieval songs and ballads, we do have the Jest of Robin Hood, which is sort of the longest form, almost epic-ish kind of poem that has a number of stories within it. But even in that, he starts fully formed as an outlaw in the woods. And it does end with his death, treacherously killed by the Prioress of Kirklees, which we'll get a little bit more into as we get into the archaeology element too, because there's some fun things there to bring up with Kirklees. And then but again, he's just an outlaw. He is a yeoman who leads a band of outlaws in the woods. And why he's doing this, how he gets started as an outlaw, what outlawed him, it's unknown. He engages in poaching, he engages in thievery, occasionally in murder even. So he's engaging in outlaw activities, but what was the initial act of outlawry, there's no record.
What does the jest mean?
It's just a story. Yeah, and that first got published in around the turn of the 15th century. We do get later ballads going into like the 17th century that start to come up with origin stories for Robin Hood, getting into battles with foresters in the Anthony Munday plays, since a lot of that is about him becoming an outlaw. It's actually kind of vague there too. I think been engaged in some kind of poaching activities, and his lands just kind of get seized, and so he has to go live in the woods. It's not very satisfactory as an origin story, and they're very dull plays. And so then you have various people kind of through the centuries that occasionally will graft on an origin from a historical figure like Roger Godberd. This idea of somebody who was fighting for Simon de Montfort and in a failed rebellion. And those will kind of get latched on, or just, I think one of the chroniclers just kind of strikes him as an outlaw, that he had accidentally murdered an individual and then ran off into the woods. So you get a couple of things here and there, but as like a cohesive story with a start to an end, that's not coming until much later, not until you're starting to get novels and operas in the late 1700s and in the 1800s.
That's a very modern thing, where you have this cycle of different episodes and people want a resolution, so therefore they put it together into a big story later on.
Or you want just a cohesive package that you can sell. Come to our play, come to our opera, and then of course in the 20th century, come to our movie.
So is this, okay, sorry, before we move on to the archaeology, just one last question about the history of this tradition. Well, actually, I guess I have two. But one of them is, is this really strictly an English, North English, Scottish type story? Is there any parallels with stories in other areas of Europe that would suggest there's a common folklore tradition that it's coming out of, or is it its own thing?
So, yes and no.
Okay.
There is something that is very uniquely English about Robin Hood, and he is a figure that is kind of coming from some sort of combination of legal records, of popular stories. There are other outlaw tales that are popular in England. England really loved its outlaw tales. In the Middle Ages, you get Eustace the Monk, you get Fulk Fitzwarren, you get Hereward the Wake. You get these sort of real-life outlaws, you get these fictional outlaws, and Robin Hood is existing in this sort of ether in a way that feels very uniquely English.
Okay.
But
you don't have as many outlaw tales in Germanic folklore or something like that?
I don't know that I would say it exactly that way. You do get outlaw tales around the world.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So there is an archetypal quality to Robin Hood. And one of the things that is fun to look at is how you could put into like a Google search bar, the Robin Hood of, and start to get like, oh, there's a Robin Hood of Wales. There's a Robin, even though like all these Scottish chroniclers loved Robin Hood, sometimes William Wallace is the Robin Hood of Scotland, or sometimes Rob Roy is the Robin Hood of Scotland. Here in Wales, Tom Sean Cotty is the Robin Hood of Wales.
Okay.
And there's Robin Hoods of Greece, Robin Hoods of Sicily. Some of these are very modern, but some of them are ancient. I did an episode with Professor Min-Soo Kang talking about Hong Gil-dong, who's often called the Robin Hood of Korea. Now, because of the close connections between England and the continent, it's impossible to say that there wasn't also some form of influence. And the place where Robin Hood specifically was most likely influenced by the continent and the stories there is actually in the form of Maid Marian.
Okay.
Because Maid Marian, or a figure named Marian, predates Robin Hood as a literary figure.
Interesting.
In the French tradition.
Okay.
In these sort of pastoral plays and songs where a maiden, a damsel named Marian, is often courted by some sort of knight or lord, and sometimes she manages to chase him off. Other times he manages to woo her, often trying to impress her with fancy gifts. Sometimes she has a peasant lover who kind of comes to her rescue, but sometimes the peasant lover gets embarrassed. Sometimes this peasant lover is named Robin.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah.
When's the earliest reference of this?
I think those go back to the 13th century. I'm
So like
pretty
a century
sure.
earlier, and
Yeah.
maybe when this is set.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Our concept of Marion getting introduced into the Robin stories is likely with the association with Robin in these very vernacular play games, especially associated around May Day, where there would be celebrations and games that would involve Robin Hood. Sometimes in fundraising efforts, they would do these plays and games where there would be physical conflicts, and sometimes these would just sort of incorporate other sort of folk traditions and characters in parades. And one of these stock characters is a jolly friar, which is where Friar Tuck probably
yeah.
gets associated with Robin Hood, and as sort of a May Queen type figure coming in from that pastoral, potentially, not certain, but potentially coming in from that pastoral French tradition, would be Maid Marian. And of course, this is the post-Norman England, so there is a lot of cultural contact between France and England during this time. So
I mean,
this
it
is
wasn't even the modern nations that we think of.
right,
Yeah, yeah.
and it's easy also because, as mentioned previously, Robin has this association with the Virgin Mary.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. There's this interesting thing, Virgin Mary,
Right.
Maid Marian.
Right, Marian just being a diminutive of Mary, so that there's kind of already and with her having an association with a peasant figure, like a shepherd usually named Robin, it's like just this kind of game of telephone almost between these two traditions that just end up overlapping.
Interesting.
And then by the time of the Anthony Munday plays, there's a character he includes, a Marion Fitzwalter, who was a real historical person who lived during the time of King John's reign, who he pursued in a romantic sort of way, we might say, to put it euphemistically. And she's incorporated as a character in his plays, and she ends up going off into the woods to be with Robin, and she drops the name Matilda and takes the name Marion.
Huh. Okay. So, all right, last question about the history of this tale. So there's this common theme of outlaw, defying authority and stuff like that. But as we know, myths and stories reflect contemporary culture that they're being told in.
Yes.
Right? So there's, you could think about these modern stories and the kind of lessons they have for us today in the 21st or 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
What are the different lessons that these stories give off in different tellings, let's say?
Yeah, and so that's, I think, something that's really fascinating, and I think it's hard to pin down when it comes to the Middle Ages. I've seen a few different people put some stamps on that. My friend Will Hoff has talked a lot about Robin Hood serving as a way to help promote communal work, and we do see this with the idea of there being groups of people who are coming together for a common cause. And before we get those early ballads, like Robin Hood the Monk and the Potter and the Jest, we have records of people coming together sometimes to raise money, like often for church repairs, church activities. They're collecting money, relates to these May Day games. There's a case in 1436 where an individual named Piers Venerables and a group of men broke some other people out of jail and escaped into the woods. And in the court report, they're referred to as being like unto Robin Hood and his men.
Huh.
And shortly thereafter, there was kind of a boycotting disruptive action with a group of workers who were chanting, "War, war, war, we are Robin Hood's men," while I forget exactly what their cause was, my apologies. But it's that idea of, so the lesson there being that common folk can unite to serve some sort of function.
Okay.
You get this kind of communal aspect, this sort of working together, cooperative element, and that it can be against an authoritative figure or force. It can be against the law. It can be it can be against the church, like in the stories where they're robbing abbots and you're trying to say, hey, you need to be better. You're not doing the things you're supposed to be doing. But it can also be for, hey, we're going to do church repairs and gather money together.
So it's a little bit of both.
Right, but it's still that idea of we're coming together for a cause. And then when we get into the modern era and we get into the modern movies, it becomes a little easier to pin down the cultural resonances because they're just so much closer to us.
Yeah, of course. I saw on Wikipedia that some people classify different movies into having a socialist versus a libertarian Robin Hood. Is that true?
I mean, I think one can make that case.
Which movie would best exemplify the socialist Robin Hood?
So certainly the series that would represent the socialist one the best would be the 1950s Adventures of Robin Hood television show.
Marian, with ardent glance, keeps Count de Walden occupied. Through the castle all the while, his henchmen are defied.
That's an interesting time for there to be a socialist message on TV.
Well, this
right during the Red Scare.
Well, a lot of the writers for that show were blacklisted Hollywood writers.
Okay.
So like award-winning film writers from Hollywood who had socialist leanings and were getting blacklisted were being offered jobs by Hannah Weinstein of Sapphire Entertainment to come over to the UK and write this Robin Hood show.
Interesting. Very interesting. So how about the libertarian Robin Hood? What's the best capitalist version of Robin Hood? Maybe Robin Hood Men in Tights. He's very capitalist there.
Yeah. I think a lot of the kind of Kevin Costner-y, the Robin Hood that is based around I've come back from the Crusades to find I have been wronged, to have found that like my property has been taken from me.
Personal grievance.
And I'm going to turn it into a personal grievance. And they actually did that in that 1950s show also, but then they didn't make that as motivating factor.
Okay.
They just had it be part of the backstory really. But in Prince of Thieves, in Men in Tights, in the Taron Egerton one, even though there is this lip service to like we're trying to help other people and trying to form a community, Robin's motivations tend to be personal. It's about how he has been grieved. It's his personal relationship with the sheriff that drives his actions more than anything.
Okay, this makes sense. We can see all these different meanings, these different stories, the histories. Now, all right, but this is set in real place. How do we connect the archaeology to this?
Yes.
Let's think about how we can connect real places, real monuments, real artifacts to these stories.
Right, which we very much can do. So sometimes in ways where we're examining a structure that might still exist, like St. Mary's that we brought up before, so we can...
So this is St. Mary's in Nottingham?
So this is, St. Mary's right in the heart of Nottingham itself.
Okay.
There in the city. You can go visit it today. But by using archaeology and historical records, we can look at how it has changed over time. You know, we can learn about how it was similar to how it would have been different in the medieval past. And it's always hard to like talk about in the time of Robin Hood because since
we don't know which
this
time
is a
it is.
fictional character, are we talking about the reign of Richard I? Are we talking about when the ballads would have been first kind of sung? What do we talk about when they were first written down? You know, and that's a large gap of time.
Yeah, of course.
But that's part of what archaeology is good for, because Robin Hood isn't really a historical figure. One of the best ways to study him is through archaeology. And we can take real places, real events, and use archaeology to learn a lot more of them. So sticking with Nottingham, I've got a couple photos there of the gatehouse to Nottingham Castle.
Okay.
Also, you can go visit it today.
I can see multiple architectural phases even.
Yes, exactly. I took that photo just last month.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, and so what we have here is archaeology that has uncovered the base of the gatehouse there, and then it has been reconstructed. As you can see very clearly, the upper portion is all very modern reconstruction.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
But that's the most that we have of a medieval castle in Nottingham itself. So this was a large castle, probably initially created as a wooden castle post-Normans, and then built up with multiple building phases to become one of the bigger castles in the Midlands, and a notable stronghold. It was besieged exactly once.
Okay.
And do you know by who?
No.
King Richard I.
There we go. Now we have some connections here. So this is literally Patrick Stewart coming back.
Yes. So that what has become familiar to us through the movies, this idea of Prince John trying to usurp King Richard's throne while Richard is away at crusades, that's real history. And when Richard came back to England, he had to besiege Nottingham. Prince John wasn't there. I think he was actually in France. But some of his supporters were at Nottingham, and I think there was a 3-day siege. You can read detailed reports about what happened at that siege.
Interesting.
If you go visit the castle, where this real history took place, that our stories of Robin Hood circle around, and there have been a few writers that have figured out ways to write Robin Hood into that real history.
Okay.
In a sort of historical fiction sort of way. But it is real history that, King Richard is real, Prince John is real. Prince John really kind of did try to usurp his brother's throne, and his brothers, and he still did end up becoming king afterwards. There's a lot of debate that I see between historians today about how terrible John may or may not have been. I fall on the side of he was a bad dude. He sucked. Straight up sucked. Awful
What was
guy.
the worst thing he did?
He did a lot. Well, he was almost certainly responsible for murdering his own nephew to secure his succession to the English throne.
That's pretty despicable.
There are multiple people, including women, who he just locked into dungeons and allowed to languish there.
That's pretty despicable.
Starved to death. He basically behaved in very mercurial ways with the barons. He was hard to predict in terms of if he was going to be on somebody's side or if he was going to turn around and start taxing them, trying to seize land. Started wars all the time, got into conflicts with the Pope. And I've seen people try to defend his conflicts with the Pope in that the Pope was trying to exert its authority in terms of saying who he should name as Archbishop, and he didn't want to go with what the Pope was saying. Sure, that's fine, but it also led to not just him getting excommunicated, but the entirety of England being placed under an interdict for 10 years. Where, nobody talks about this, but for 10 years in the 13th century, people couldn't hold mass. They, weddings couldn't be held. Proper burials couldn't be done. The priests couldn't sanctify things. They had to, water down the sacred oils because they couldn't bless new oil.
You can see this conflict with the church also then percolating through these popular stories in a sense, yeah.
Yeah. So, that dude sucked. He did not, things were not great for the people at
Even
the time.
the Pope didn't like him.
Yeah, Pope didn't like him. And his own barons didn't like him.
Yeah.
Which is why they tried to install a Frenchman, Louis, the son of Philip II of France, onto the throne. And a lot of them were supporting that. So they were saying, okay, we're going to welcome a new guy to take charge. This is also why John was forced to put his seal on Magna Carta, because the barons were so upset with him. They're like, we need some legal protections in here to tell you can't just do whatever you want. You can't act like an absolute monarch. And so, yeah, he was upset at a lot of people. So this is
the connection. Last night to prep, I saw the Russell Crowe Robin Hood, and there's an early Magna Carta in there. So, yeah, that's how he drew that in. Okay, I was wondering about that.
Yeah. The only reason why the country basically wasn't torn apart by civil war because so many barons were upset with him and wanted to install this French prince as their new king, was because he had the good grace to die of dysentery in, I think, 1216, because John's son then became king.
Which was not very good.
Well, it was fine. He was a kid.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the barons were like, okay, he's just a kid. He can't be as bad as his dad. And with William Marshall as the regent for a few years, who was a really respected knight, they kind of turned their backs on Louis, who wasn't really impressing them a whole lot. And we're like, okay, fine, we'll let this kid be king. More or less. The very abbreviated version. Historians will come at me. It is a lot more complicated than that. But yeah, but all this conflict with John, with Richard, like, these are real historical people. And one of the things that's fun about, using Robin Hood as a hook is it introduces people to these figures.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And then you can learn the real history, whether it is through historical records or through archaeology. And in the case of Nottingham Castle, while nothing really remains, you have that one gatehouse that's been rebuilt. And then on the site, on top of this great big sandstone rock there in the center of Nottingham, you have a ducal palace that was built in the late 1700s.
Oh, much later, yeah.
Burned down by a mob in the 1800s.
That works.
And then
Robin Hood-esque.
Yeah, they were protesting their in regards to being their rights to vote, I believe. And yeah, protesting, angry mob, burned it down. Good for them. Nobody was really living there at the time. And it was mostly symbolic. And it's been rebuilt, but still as that ducal palace and kind of converted into a museum today.
Okay.
But as far as the actual medieval castle, where there was a lot of interesting history in addition to that siege from Richard I, it's also where Edward III's men seized Roger Mortimer, his mother's supposed lover, who was kind of trying to usurp his authority and the throne sometime later, through these tunnels. So there's tunnels you can still see there in the castle that are known as Mortimer's Hole, where the supporters of Edward III snuck into the castle through the sandstone that the castle is built on. So lots of great history there. And it's where Charles I raised his standard at the start of the Civil War in the 1600s.
At Nottingham.
At Nottingham,
Okay.
in Nottingham Castle. But then he left, and the parliamentary forces took over the castle. They held it for a while, and then destroyed it. They said, we don't want to risk the royalists having it, and just thoroughly destroyed it.
And was this the castle where the sheriff of Nottingham would have been?
He would have operated out of it at least.
Okay.
He might have had a separate residence,
Okay.
but there's no reason to think he wouldn't have at least operated in some way out of this castle. It depends. There were many different sheriffs of Nottingham over the years, not all of whom lived in Nottingham, because sometimes it would be like Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire would all be part of their purview, and they might already have their own castles.
So what kind of title is sheriff?
So the sheriff, it's an administrative title.
Okay.
That it does
So it's not
oversee
like
things
a
like the
duke,
collection
though, or a
of
count,
taxes.
or-
No.
Okay.
And there are records of people who, usually it is like a sign of favoritism, like getting a cabinet position or something, to get this authoritative position. It gives you a chance to kind of, there are opportunities for enrichment through it.
Of course, you're collecting
But
taxes.
there are also records of people who didn't have noble lineage or aristocratic background still being put into this position, often in ways that didn't work out very well.
Okay.
Philip Mark, who was the sheriff during part of King John's reign, is an example of that. But so even though it's Nottingham Castle is this place that is directly connected to the Sheriff of Nottingham, directly connected to Charles I, to Edward III, Roger Mortimer, Richard I, like lots of fascinating history to that place. Totally destroyed now, but we have a really good sense of what it looks like. A couple weeks ago, I saw an Unreal Engine somebody had made where they totally rebuilt the castle virtually. You could fly around it, and it's because of archaeology. It's because we have excavated the grounds. we have detailed layouts of what it looked like. You know, combined with historical records, the archaeology lets us virtually know what this magnificent castle that has now totally been leveled looks like.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. And you mentioned some novelists are using some of those detailed plans to try to work in their stories.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Yeah. There's a lot of, I've met several historians who have become novelists.
Okay.
And they try to get in as many tight historical details as they can, including how it is incorporated on these sandstone rocks with caves underneath, including the real history of when Richard actually would have been there.
You want to give a shout out to one really good novel that does that?
Lauren Johnson does the most in terms of really tying in historical law and procedures, as well as historical events. Her book is called The Arrow of Sherwood.
The Arrow of Sherwood. Okay.
But there's a lot of other authors out there as well. I just interviewed Amy S. Kaufman, whose new book, The Traitor of Sherwood Forest, came out just last month.
Cool.
Yep. And she really tries to tie in some real history as well as incorporate the action from all those medieval ballads into her story as well.
And do any of the medieval ballads, do they reference anything physical about this castle that we can relate to the archaeology?
So there's discussion of like a jail that Robin is put in Robin Hood and the Monk, and there is an oubliette, a hole under the Hall of Justice, right next, like it's across the street from St. Mary's. And so there's this speculative element of whether or not that could be connected. In the Jest of Robin Hood, Robin is killed by the Prioress of Kirklees.
Okay.
And there's later ballads, later stories that have picked up on this tradition and incorporated it as well. Sometimes she poisons Robin, sometimes she bleeds him to death. And traditionally, while he is dying, Robin Hood fires an arrow through the window and tells Little John to bury him where the arrow lands.
Okay,
And
that's complicated, but kind of cool.
Right. And there have been a few adaptations that have incorporated this in various ways. And about 650 yards, so a little too far for an actual bow shot, and 650 yards from the gatehouse of the nunnery that had been there in the Middle Ages. And there is still to this day this tomb that's been thought of as Robin Hood's grave.
Okay.
There's this big stone slab and another stone with an epitaph on it. A couple of issues with this. We first see it mentioned by Richard Grafton in 1569.
Okay.
So again, we're already talking hundreds of years after Robin Hood would have lived.
But hundreds of years before us.
Yes. And then it doesn't get described until 1607 by William Camden for the 5th edition of the Britannia Chronicle and Atlas. And then we have this drawing here that I'm showing you now that is attributed to a Dr. Nathaniel Johnson from, I think from York in around 1665. There's some notion that this particular drawing is the one that we have today that you can find online. It was a copy by William Buckley or somebody else. But it's attributed to him, and this is presumably what he saw. And it says, "Here lies Robin Hood," and then also William Goldborough, Thomas, and then something undecipherable. So in theory, 3 or more men were buried underneath this slab, has this cross on it. And then in later years, you also start to see people referencing an epitaph that is there too about Robin Hood. And modern scholars have looked at this epitaph and been like, oh God, this is just a joke. This is nonsense. Just like from a linguistic study, comparative literature study,
clearly much later.
Don't even need to use any archaeological methods to tell that it is 100% not medieval. And this site was basically vandalized by tourists coming. The family that owns the plot of land that's on private land centuries ago put up this gate around this big iron fence. But by the time that Richard Gough was writing his Sepulchral Monuments of Great Britain in 1786, he was describing it as broken, defaced, and illegible. Now, some years before that, according to Richard Gough, Sir Samuel Armitage, whose family owned that land, exhumed it.
Okay.
They dug for about a meter or so under the ground, found no evidence that anybody was buried there. Not Robin Hood, not William Goldborough, not Thomas.
Nothing. It's just
there
a stone.
was no, yeah, that it appears to have just been a stone.
Huh.
And so this is one of the like archaeology and Robin Hood. Yeah, it's a legend.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're using archaeology to be like, yeah, it's just a legend, guys. Calm down. The search
And
for
at this point, it
truth.
just looks like a mossy stone
Yeah.
with a line on it.
The search for truth sometimes indicates that a legend is a legend.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah.
In 1215, one of these very sensationalist archaeology shows, Expedition Unknown, I think it is.
Okay, yeah, with like Gates, Josh
Yeah.
Gates, yeah.
They did an episode on Robin Hood. They came to the grave. They used some ground penetrating radar and didn't find any signs
Found
that
some leaves.
yeah, didn't find any signs that it had been a burial site, that there were remains under there or anything. So
Okay.
we don't have detailed records about what Armitage did in like the 1600s when he dug this up, but modern techniques indicate there's nothing there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So we have a grave of Robin Hood that doesn't appear to have any Robin Hood underneath it. We also, though, have graves for other members of the Merry Men,
Okay.
because Robin Hood tourism has always been big. And we can also study those with archaeology. So we have in Hathersage
Okay.
a very nicely legible tombstone that says, "Here lies buried Little John, the friend and lieutenant of Robin Hood. He died in a cottage, now destroyed, to the east of the churchyard. The grave is marked by this old headstone and footstone, and is underneath this old yew tree."
This gravestone looks extremely modern to me, especially with the parenthetical. It's like how I
Now
write an
destroyed.
email.
Well, yeah, and I don't think they're trying to claim that
I
tomb
know, I'm
marker, but you do get this little fenced plot
Yeah.
that is more or less like about the size of like a sarcophagus.
Okay.
So very large. So the idea is like, ooh, this is where a large person could be buried.
Oh, you mean a Little John?
Yes, exactly, a Little John, beneath this old yew tree near this churchyard, and in the place that is kind of associated with this character of Hathersage, which is in Derbyshire.
Okay.
And at one point, in 1784, they exhumed that grave to see if they could find Little John's body.
Was there a giant in there?
Well,
Was there a really little person in there?
the only
my
thing
size?
that they're recorded of that they have supposedly found, and again, so this is 18th century. So this is before archaeology really exists as a discipline. So they don't have like a good reviewed article about their findings.
Of course.
What they reportedly found was a femur that was about 29.5 inches long.
That's like wow, that's a big femur.
Right.
That's like, what, 2.5 feet long? So not quite a meter, but
So this is
70 centimeters?
this evidence that a extremely tall man was buried in that plot.
This makes sense to me.
Right.
Yeah.
Now,
Sure it wasn't a giraffe?
right. Was it an animal that they
Yeah.
found, or perhaps a misidentified leg bone, maybe not a femur, but a tibia, just in terms of, various proportional sizes. Or did it exist at all? If there was really a skeleton, there,
You'd expect more
why
than
did
just a
they
femur.
only find a single leg bone?
Yeah.
So that's my speculative thought, is that it's probably something from an animal or didn't exist at all. And it presumably got reinterred, and it has that whiff to me of oh, we're going to come up with this story to help encourage tourism. At that same time, dating back to the 1600s at least, in the local church, very close to where this grave is, St. Michael's Church, they had a cap and a longbow that they said belonged to Little John.
Okay.
So this was a tourist trap.
Yeah, exactly.
17th century, 18th century tourist trap. Come see Little John's hat, see his long bow,
It's
see
like
his
all those
grave.
saints'
We
relics
know
that are-
his grave
yeah.
was there because we found this giant leg bone in it.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So wait, quick question back to the histories. So Little John is explicitly a pun even in the early ballads.
Well, it's not explicit.
Okay.
His name is there.
It's just implicit.
He's just
but
given as the
meant
name.
to be an extremely large person named Little John.
He's just given the name Little John.
Okay.
The idea of him being tall comes in later also.
About the time they found the femur.
Probably. Yeah. I'm pretty sure it's something that comes in the like later ballads and garlands that were being produced in the 1600s, 1700s, the ones that Joseph Ritson later collected in what we call the child ballads now, a big collection,
Okay.
which is kind of the easiest way to look them up. And that's where you get the story of Robin Hood and Little John meeting on the bridge and having the quarterstaff battle. So that's an old traditional story, but not one that goes back to the Middle Ages.
Okay.
So we've had the notion of Little John being a joke as a name for a long time, but no evidence of that exactly going back to our earliest extant stories.
That makes sense. So, all right, I got a question for you. So we were talking beforehand, before we started recording, about how, I study the archaeology of mythology in ancient Greece, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so there's been lots of studies that show how, these oral legends, they go on for so many centuries, and the weapons in them are a mishmash of weapons from different periods. So, like,
Yes.
you have this the different shields that are described in the Iliad. Some of them match Bronze Age shields, some of them match Iron Age shields. Same thing with the spears. Now, what about the weapons in Robin Hood? You mentioned the staff, for example,
quarterstaff, yeah.
and the different bows that they're using. Do do different versions depict or describe these weapons as differently in terms of the time period those weapons would exist?
So you usually don't get a lot of details.
Okay.
In the Robin Hood poems and songs and plays that we have from early on, you don't get the good descriptive language you get out of Homer.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no equivalent of
Come on, English
Achilles'
poets,
shields.
what's going on?
Yeah, it would be. How cool would it be to have like the Robin Hood's bow that is described as detailedly as Odysseus's bow? That would be amazing, but it doesn't exist. They just kind of get mentioned as using a bow, using a sword. In Robin Hood and the Potter, he actually fights the Potter with a buckler and a sword. So you kind of just get the notion that these are...
The buckler's the little shield, right?
Yeah, a little shield.
Yeah.
He just has a little shield and a sword, which is not a thing we really associate with Robin Hood very much, and even feels anachronistic to something that is set in the kind of high Middle Ages and feels like it's something later, maybe something around when the things are actually being written down. So mostly you get the sense of common reference to the tale tellers or to the scribes, just whatever weapons are familiar to them. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of physical contests going on with the play games, and that's where something like quarterstaff bouts and archery contests come in. So as part of the popular entertainment for telling these stories, they would include sessions where, people would have a little wrestling match, or they'd have a little quarterstaff bout, or a little sword play, or a little archery contest. That's just part of the entertainments.
Yeah, it's very meta, because there's probably an archery contest happening right next door while you're listening to this ballad.
Well, and it's very similar to like what you would see at a Renaissance fair.
Yeah.
I had a revelation when I was discussing this with Will Hoff at one point. I used to do Renaissance fairs, and sometimes these would be...
You strike me as the kind of guy that did Renaissance fairs.
Yeah, I did. And we would tell stories and incorporate fights into those stories.
Okay.
Just like seeing an action film, only doing it as a show in a form of live theater. And, and sometimes we did them as Robin Hood stories. So, yeah, it's just very much that kind of thing. And they were probably using the things that they had access to.
Yeah.
And just what was familiar at the time. So anachronistic to when the stories supposedly take place, but familiar to the people who are telling the tales.
Which I think that's what mythology is. It's always adapted into the new anachronisms because, it's like Brad Pitt on his cell phone during Troy,
Or the crazy repeating crossbow bolt action things you get in the Taron Egerton 2018 Robin Hood movie.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you got this kind of modern version of something that makes it look cool. But yeah.
Exactly.
It's what audiences expected because it has a vibe of authenticity because it refers to what other movies are doing, but it's not accurate. It just feels authentic.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. Just this one stone that was the cornerstone of a church building.
Huh.
And it's now in a graveyard in the same churchyard still by the, again, yew trees, interestingly. And it is supposedly the burial site of Will Scarlet.
Uh-huh.
But there's no markers there.
There's no writing.
There's no writing.
nothing.
There's no
It's just
epitaph,
myth.
no tombstone. There's just this cornerstone from a church that they put there when the church got rebuilt in the, I think, 16th century or so. And I don't know, they thought that bit looked cool, thought we're saving, thought they could build up their own little touristy thing, but then nobody put in any real effort.
So clearly this stone was placed in the 16th century when the church was rebuilt.
Yeah.
But when was this church built that this stone came from?
Probably like the 1400s, so
So even too late as well. Okay. So this is all just like as soon as you get an archaeologist that understands buildings and materials, boom, that's going to fall flat.
Yep, exactly. And that's where the archaeology comes in. Because as soon as you get somebody who can study the thing, because, to an untrained eye, it's, oh, that's an interesting looking stone. Yeah, that could be a grave marker. Is that ancient? I don't know. But you get somebody who is, as you say, a buildings archaeologist, somebody who can study architectural styles over decades, somebody who can just take a look at the weathering. They can be like, I'm unconvinced.
So are there legends of some of these types of things where we don't have any physical remains of like other claims for graves for these people or stuff like that?
Well, I mean, there's just tons of stuff all over the place.
It's all over the place. Like
Nottinghamshire, Derbyshire, Yorkshire. There's the area is, there's dozens of like Robin Hood's Hill. Robin Hood's Well was another kind of tourist site for a while where they claimed to have Robin Hood's, I think, his bow and his helmet. And not a thing we usually associate with Robin Hood.
No, we have the cap,
But the cap is a modern thing.
Okay.
Yeah, but in a 17th century tourist trap, they're like, oh, we have Robin Hood's helmet and his slippers and his bow. Come see these.
His slippers.
Another
one has his tights, right?
Yeah. Well, Mel Brooks has this now. And Creswell Crags, which is, gorgeous caverns just north of Sherwood Forest and Derbyshire. And they have a Robin Hood's cave. And it's like, ooh, here's this legend of where Robin Hood would hide from the Sheriff of Nottingham in this cave. And, it's a fascinating site where there's a lot of really amazing archaeology that's happening, where it looks like earlier people were visiting the area on a temporary basis. They weren't residing there, but kind of perhaps sheltering or following food sources. And we find prehistoric bones like in the cavern that they say is Robin Hood's cave. They found Neanderthal remains. They found ancient hyena remains.
Wait, are you saying that Robin Hood was a Neanderthal?
I mean, based on the evidence they found in this cave, they found hippopotamus bones.
This is really interesting Paleolithic stuff.
Yeah, so really interesting Paleolithic stuff. Creswell Crags, yeah.
Okay.
And it's just gorgeous too, worth going to.
Okay.
So you get all these kinds of places. And sometimes there is some fascinating archaeology that exists in those places. Does it relate to Robin Hood? No.
You're saying he's not a Neanderthal?
I'm saying...
Are you sure this isn't a Paleolithic myth that has been recounted since then?
It's hard to say.
It's like Atlantis. Maybe
when those oral traditions begin, it's hard to say.
Are you saying that Robin Hood was the Neanderthal that took down Atlantis?
one could speculate on all sorts of things, and people often do speculate on all kinds of things.
We're creating pseudo-archaeology right now. Just wait.
There's a book that came out recently, not going back to Neanderthal times or Atlantis, but that speculates that a real Robin Hood was the one who murdered William II, the son of William the Conqueror. And it's crazy speculative stuff, but it's pushing Robin Hood further and further back in time. It's putting Robin Hood in the kind of post-Norman invasion time, which, Battle of Hastings 1066. So that's way
200 years earlier, 150 years earlier,
yeah, than even just the King Richard stuff, which is even earlier than anything actually is likely to have happened if anything did. So people do like to push things further and further back. But as you know, the more you do that, the more things become very speculative.
Stack of cards crumbles down. Yeah.
And doing that sort of thing often just kind of ends up you need to manufacture a lot of, well, what if Henry I, William's brother, was friends with this person who he made a deal with, and wouldn't that line up so well if this thing happened? And it's like, well, sure, if.
Yeah, well, show me the evidence, yeah. So, all right, look, I deal with a lot of pseudo-history and pseudo-archaeology. Are there any, real bad actors in this that sort of say the scholars are trying to cancel me? This is the true story of Robin Hood or anything like that? Is there, actual money being made by these kind of...
Well, there's definitely money being made because there's people who get books out. There's books about how Roger Godbert is really Robin Hood. There's books about how this mythical assassin of William Rufus is the real Robin Hood. And I've seen these books for sale at the visitor center at Sherwood Forest.
Sure.
So yeah, they're making money. I've seen them pop up on podcasts.
And that's like amateur history though, in a
yeah.
sense. But is there any that you'd classify more as pseudo-history, people who are more aggressive against academics, saying the mainstream thing is wrong and they're trying to hide my story? Using that kind of rhetoric is what I mean.
Not quite.
Okay.
The closest I get is people who really want to latch into the mystical elements. And that's probably a thing you see a lot with Atlantis and other things too. There's a very popular notion surrounding Robin Hood and the figure of the Green Man, Robin Hood and the figure of Puck or Robin Goodfellow, a idea that Robin Hood represents some archetypal summer king or ivy king, that he has a battle with the Holly King, and that the whole May Day festival is this early pagan thing that surrounds this nature worship, and Robin is this druidic figure, and it's all based on extremely modern neo-pagan ideas. There's zero evidence for any of it. And when you push back on that, when you say okay, but Margaret Murray just made this up, when you say that there's no evidence that the peasant folk at the time of these Robin Hood stories were secretly pagans, there's just zero evidence for this. They get squirrely. They don't want to hear it.
And so again, it's kind of associated with kind of this alternative mystical crowd.
Yeah, and they're not trying to say big history is trying to shut us down. Nobody's really lashing out at historians the way I see archaeologists get lashed out at.
Okay.
It's just a lot more, well, that's inconvenient to the way I want to imagine things.
Okay. So it's not as harmful, at least.
Yeah, I don't think it's as harmful, but you get a lot of the same, there's some of the same mentality there in terms of you're yucking my yum by trying to say that this thing that I want to believe in isn't real. Why can't you let me have my fun? Why can't you let me have my beliefs? I find some spiritual meaning from this, and I don't want to tell people they can't find spiritual meaning from it. I do want to respect the actual history. I think it's a little disingenuous and harmful to be saying these medieval peasants were secretly engaged in these druidic worships and pagan fertility rites when there's just no evidence of that. But if they want to take meaning from it, if they want to say, well, I'm, finding a connection to nature and making a spiritual journey that involves thinking about Robin Hood as this avatar for living in harmony with nature, sure, go ahead and do that.
Yeah,
I
of
think
course.
that's perfectly fine. That's great. If
That brings you peace and happiness.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm the same way with pseudo-archaeology. You can believe whatever you want, but at the same time, I'm going to express my opinion on the evidence that I've studied and that kind of stuff. And my issue is more the lashing out towards
Right.
scholars, which it sounds like it's not happening here, which is good.
Yeah, and it's easier to have these kind of conversations and for feelings to get hurt and for there to not be lashings out, because at the end of the day, Robin Hood is a fictional character.
Yeah.
If your favorite version of Robin Hood is the 1980s Robin of Sherwood, which is a very mystically pagan version, he is Herdon's son, and there are all kinds of pagan blessings and spiritual elements that get brought in. If that's your favorite version, and it is a favorite version for a lot of people, it still has a huge following. That's fine. That's cool.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Robin's not real.
It's a myth.
He's whatever we want him to be.
We put all our little thoughts and views on the world into there.
Yeah.
And then we have a story that makes us happy.
Yeah, and nobody's trying to say, though, that version is real.
Yeah, exactly.
It's still just a story that people are enjoying.
Yeah. All right, back to the archaeology. You have anything else fun to show me?
Yeah, so the one thing I also wanted to bring up from an archaeological perspective is, what if there was something in one of those graves?
Okay.
What if we did go to Kirklees and exhume something and actually find a burial?
So you're saying we should apply for a permit?
Yes. 1215, expedition unknown, doing some ground penetrating radar, 1600s, they dug down 3 feet. Like, one website I was reading that repeatedly talked about how what was Simon Armitage doing, only digging down 3 feet? They needed to go down at least 6. So
Get some pickaxes. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's dig down a little bit deeper. Let's do some soil analysis, to really tell if there was something there. That would be great. So the other thing I wanted to bring up as an archaeological component and a bit of archaeological study, if we did find something there, could we ever know it was Robin Hood? No, of course not. But there are tells that we could use to look for, is this somebody that matches what we might expect to see?
Like, does he have a buckler?
Right. So he's often described as being buried with his bow in hand.
Okay.
Would the bow survive? Well, but if we could do some analysis, we might.
Maybe some of the arrowheads would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. But then there's also the bones themselves. Can we date them to this period? Can we date them to this area? Using isotope analysis, and then doing osteology. We could look at the bones themselves. One of the couple of the images that I wanted to share is of the Mary Rose.
Okay.
So Mary Rose, famous example of a Tudor era warship. The type of ship was a carrack, I believe. Yes. Launched in 1511, rebuilt 1536, sank in July 19th, 1545, off of the Isle of Wight while engaged in battle with the French. Horrible disaster, 90% casualty rate. And then it was discovered in 1971 and raised, quite famously in 1982. So this entire warship, or just about, huge portion of it, raised from the seafloor in the 1980s. You can see it in a museum now. And they found over 172 longbows there. They found thousands of arrows. They found bracers. And they found a lot of skeletons, including skeletons that have acromyali.
Acromyali? I'm not sure. I don't do the human stuff.
Yeah. But it's a condition that has been identified with Olympic archers. Yeah. Because there's a lot of strain that gets put on the forearm for the one that has the pressure of holding the bow pulling back on it, and then on the shoulders as well. That repeated action, especially with something really heavy like the immense war bows, the long bows that were being used that have these 140 pound weight draws, Those put immense strain on your muscles and on the bones themselves, to the point that anybody that does this on a regular basis, as archers at the time that at that period would do, we would be able to tell in their bones. Like, if Robin Hood really
Yes.
existed, if Robin Hood was this great archer, we would be able to look at his bones
And
and
have that.
tell that he's an archer. And we know we could do this because of the Mary Rose and what we found there. And here's just an image of this, one of the skeletons that has been identified as an archer. They've done a reconstruction, including facial reconstruction. They put him in period dress there to help people visualize what an archer from that period would have looked like, who was one of the sailors on the Mary Rose. And we know he was an archer because of his bones. And so if we were to be able to find bones that supposedly belong to Robin Hood
We could look for
or Little
these
John, we could look for those
signs.
kind of tales.
Yeah,
We could
that makes
use
sense.
archaeology to help, again, not definitively say this is Robin Hood, but be able to say, well, you know what? This matches some things. This would, how fascinating is this?
Yeah.
It potentially, I don't know the isotope mapping for the Midlands and for Yorkshire, but it could potentially even settle the debate of, is he from Yorkshire or Nottinghamshire?
Yeah, we'd have to look at one of those strontium isotope maps that Rich has for the British
yeah.
Island. Yeah.
Get permission to destroy one of the teeth.
Or you get Emily to do this. This is your dream.
And then again, even that, nothing definitive would come from this, but it would be interesting evidence in a way of also throwing more cold water if we found something there and then it didn't have these signs.
Yeah,
if it was
exactly,
too
yeah.
modern, if it was no signs of the repetitive strain, or if we found something really interesting like, oh, they appear to have come from Norway. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. They're Norse, actually. Yeah, or maybe you get 3 skeletons all together and one of them has a giant femur.
Yeah.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think, this is the kind of romantic notion certainly people have when they start doing archaeology, is to try to look for these legends in exactly that kind of way.
And sometimes you get a Schliemann and it pays off.
Yeah, well, I got a video on that that I gotta finish at some point, the script for, because this is, I think actually Robin Hood's a great example, because for so long people today, they're always on the internet, they're saying Schliemann proved that Troy existed, and it's like, dude, we always knew Troy existed. There was like a bishop there in medieval times. Alexander the Great and Augustus Caesar went there. There was no doubt Troy existed, just like there's no doubt Nottingham existed.
Right.
It's just a question of whether Robin Hood or Agamemnon existed.
Exactly.
And if they do, were they anything like the stories, And yeah.
And that's one of the things that I always want to drive home with this. You can go to Nottingham.
Yeah.
You can't see any of the castle except for the rebuilt gatehouse, but you can go to Sherwood Forest. You can see oak trees in Sherwood Forest. There's can and should.
Hand over that boy. Who demands it? The Sheriff of Nottingham.
And what has the boy done?
He was caught poaching in the king's forest. He dared to kill a king's deer. Dared to kill a king's deer.
You dared to poach a king's deer.
It's a real place, and it feels incredible to walk underneath the oak leaves of Sherwood Forest, to hear the birds singing. And that's one of the things you get in those early ballads and songs. You get descriptions of the birds singing in the beautiful summer air, and these kind of very wonderful scenes of Robin walking through the forests. And you can go and walk through those same forests today.
Yeah. And connect with the story in such a direct way.
Yeah. And Robin Hood doesn't need to have been a real physical person for you to be able to go and do that.
Yeah.
And he doesn't need to be a real physical person for you to just stick up for what's right in the world, for you to be charitably minded, for
You mean to rob the rich and feed the poor?
Whatever is the way that you think is the best way. Yeah, whatever is the best way you think to resist. Whether it's going to a protest, whether it is giving to charitable causes, whether it is persecuting bad actors, there's lots of ways to be a better person, and or as we were discussing before with that kind of idea of communal action. You know, Robin Hood's not a lone actor. He's got a band of merry men.
Yeah.
You know, form friendships, form groups, form community partnerships. There's lots of really solid lessons that can be learned from the stories of Robin Hood. We can learn more about the locations. We can learn more about what life was like in the Middle Ages through archaeology as a discipline. You know, if we're stealing from the rich and giving to the poor, well, what were the lives of the poor like? We can learn about their dwellings. We can learn about their life ways through archaeology better than history in a lot of cases, because chroniclers tended to not write down a lot about the daily lives of people.
And they weren't all hoods.
Right.
No,
They didn't all wear hoods. Well, they
I meant
tend
hood
for to
as
wear.
an outlaw. Yeah.
I know.
Is that where that comes from wearing a hood?
Speculatively.
Speculatively, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, cool. All right. So where can people find you?
Into the Greenwood is
Into
the
the
name of the podcast. We're on social media, including not Twitter anymore, because heck with that, but Threads, Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, with the handle @IntoGreenwood, and intogreenwood@gmail.com if you want to find us. But the podcast is on YouTube, it's on Spotify, it's on Apple Podcasts, it's on all those places. Into the Greenwood. Search for that.
We'll link
You'll
you
find us
in
there.
the details for sure. And thank you so much.
My pleasure.
It was a real pleasure to chat Robin Hood.
I'm always happy to talk Robin Hood. I'm always happy to talk archaeology. I'm always happy to talk about Greek myths.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I'll
All
have
my
to come on
favorite
your
things.
podcast and we can talk about the archaeology and mythology between the Greek and the medieval period.
Yeah, the whole
think
there's
that'd be
that
a fun
that
crossover.
idea of myth building.
And we could even record it in person.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you all. This was our first in-person podcast. I hope that it worked out for you all. And make sure to go check out Into the Greenwood with Thaddeus Papke. All
Yep.
right.
So much more Robin Hood talk.
Yeah. Later all.
Untable rhymes and riddles, tickle, tickle, giggles, squiggle, jiggle, fiddle, flint, untable rhymes and riddles, tickle, tickle, giggles, squiggle, jiggle, fiddle, dibble, 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 dibble. Flint, untable,